The Blue Jackets roster is probably going to look a little bit different next year. Where are these players going to be coming from? Could any of them be current Cleveland Monsters? We discuss on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen today every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Head to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Now, I am recording this not long after I finished recording Monday's episode, because Monday's episode should have had this in and then didn't because I ran out of time. So, again, I got a really great mailbag question that I was going to answer yesterday, and I managed to accidentally delete the email, and now I can't find any evidence the email ever existed. So now I'm starting to question whether I just invented it completely. But if this was you, thank you for sending this question in. And the question was basically, who on the Monsters could be a Blue Jacket next year? Or like, who's going to make a case for getting called up? There are some holes in the Blue Jackets roster, and I thought I would look at this question kind of like under that, and then also look at any Monsters that might be gone. Like, I think the nature of the AHL, we talked a bunch about the AHL yesterday, right? So we'll just kind of continue with that. But the nature of the AHL is that the teams look different from year to year, right? You get a lot more turnover with an AHL team than you do with an NHL team. This year's Monsters team is very different from last year's Monsters team. They lost a lot of their veteran guys, built back around them, did okay. Obviously, they're starting their playoff series tomorrow against the Laval Rocket, so that's exciting. The shout out to the Cleveland Cavaliers for just absolutely murdering the Miami Heat, meaning the series can start a little bit sooner. They did that for us, etc. But the turnover with the Monsters team, I think, is going to be really interesting because there's a lot of guys that I think are going to have some pretty good cases to make the Blue Jackets out of camp, or there are going to be guys that are going to be just straight up gone to other teams, right? And there's not really any crossover in those two. Like that, you're not going to lose NHL players to another team, right? Or let me rephrase that. Last season, Eric Robinson finished the year with the Monsters and has been a full-time NHL player this year with the Carolina Hurricanes. Josh Dunn, I believe, has spent a bunch of time with the Buffalo Sabres after being basically a permanent AHL player for the Monsters. Nick Blankenburg was a Monster that got into an NHL lineup through necessity for injury and then spent the rest of the season there, right? I don't think the kind of players that you're probably going to be seeing walk away from the Monsters are not going to be guys like that, right? It's for the most part, it's fringe guys or it's guys that are going to be Blue Jackets, right? You're not going to sit here and be like, okay, well, Jack Greaves is going to be on an NHL roster next year. If he's going to be on an NHL roster next year, it's going to be with the Blue Jackets, right? It's not like he's going to walk. There are a couple of other locks that I want to talk about, but I wanted to start off by looking at what the Blue Jackets roster currently looks like. Now, this might be a kind of controversial-ish setup to what I'm doing here, but basically I looked at who is actively signed or under team control. So I've included our lone RFA in that, which is Dmitry Voronkov. I'm not married to that. Like, I just decided, okay, well, what does the lineup look like? Like, where are the holes in the lineup right now? So UFAs, not in the question, not in the conversation at the minute. So, guys like Fabro, guys like Provorov, etc. Like they're not in this lineup. They could very well be the players that fill the holes that are in the lineup, but they're not in the lineup right now because they don't have a contract. So basically, what I've looked at is there are 5/6 holes in the lineup, 3 in the top 12 of the forwards, 2 top 6 defensemen, and a 13th forward, which I haven't listed on here because there's kind of like it's a 13th forward, right? It could be anyone. So looking at the lineup, I've got as locks, I've got Monahan, Marchenko, Fantilli, Johnson as your top 6, which means there's 2 holes in your left wing for top 6. Then I've put the Voronkov, Sillinger, Olivier line in third. Again, with an asterisk on Voronkov because he needs a new contract. He's an RFA. And then the fourth line at the minute is just Zach Aston Reese. Sean Corralier is Sean Corralier. Wow, Sean Corralier is a pending UFA. Luke Conan pending UFA. Justin Danforth pending UFA. I would be surprised if they bring Justin Danforth back. James Van Riemsdyk pending UFA. And then I also have Igor Chinikov, who is under contract but is a question mark for me. I would not be surprised to see him traded. He is under team control for, I think, another year after this one. Maybe 2. No, 1 more year after this at 2.1. Like, that's not a terrible cap hit to swallow. And what I imagine will happen is he will go on to have a very good middle 6 NHL career somewhere else. But struggled in the lineup this season, was great until he got injured, and then shockingly missed a bunch of time due to the injury, and then was not firing on all cylinders when he came back, which led to him being moved out of the lineup and then eventually moved out of the lineup, which I continue to be shocked that a player that missed 3 months with what I assume is a concussion took a little bit of time to get up to speed, but that's another conversation. Also in the mix here is Boone Jenner, who I did not put in my initial lineup, mostly because I don't know where to put him. Like my best guess is you move Olivier down to the fourth line and put Jenner on that third line with Voronkov and Sillinger. I've seen people put him on the Monahan Marchenko line. I thought he was fine there, but I don't think that's a long-term solution. I've seen people suggest putting him with Fantilli and Johnson as well, which I also don't think is a long-term solution. So if we go with, okay, let's have Voronkov, Sillinger, Jenner as your third line and then put Olivier on your fourth line, and then, you put Chinikov. Let's just throw Chinikov on one of the top 6 left wings. I don't think he'll be there, but if we do that, then you have an opening at the minute, I have an opening next to Adam Fantilli, so the second line left wing, and we have an opening at the fourth line center, and then you need a 13th forward as well. So ostensibly 2.5 openings there for monsters potentially. Moving on to the defense, this one's tougher. I don't think there's any holes on defense for monsters unless you count Denton Mateychuk, which I have mentioned him on my little side thing here as basically a lock to make the Blue Jackets a monster right now, which is why I considered it. But Werenski, gap, Mateychuk, gap. And then I've put Severson and Gabranson as your third pairing, which I don't like, but they're both under contract. And then Christiansen is your 7th defenseman. So obviously Fabro and Provorov are the missing pieces here. Neither of them under contract right now. I know that Don Waddell wants to bring them both back, which, again, continues to confuse me because I don't know how you overhaul the defense by just rolling back the same 7/8 defensemen that you had. Like, I assume Jack Johnson is gone. I assume Jordan Harris is gone. Okay. Getting a new 8th defenseman does not count as revamping or retooling the defense. So I don't know what's going to go on there. But I've put X marks there right now because neither of them are under contract. And then goaltending, obviously we've got Jet Greaves is my guess. And then I've put Elvis as the backup, but that's a question mark for me. I think Tarasov is as good as gone. The goaltending is again, the Cleveland is not going to fix the goaltending unless you count Jet Greaves as a current monster future Blue Jacket, which, semantics. So that's kind of where I'm at. So at the minute, we're looking at, okay, you've got a hole your second line left wing, and you've got a hole for your fourth line center, and then there's an extra forward spot for someone to potentially jump in and take advantage of that. And so obviously there's a couple of locks for this roster. Again, we'll talk about Greaves, we'll talk about Mateychuk in a second here. And then there's a couple of other names that I think are going to make the jump to the Blue Jackets, or could potentially make a really good case for making a jump to the Blue Jackets. So now that we've kind of laid all of that out, we've identified the holes in the roster right now. Let's take a quick break, and then when we get back, let's talk a little about Jet Greaves, Denton Mateychuk, and let's talk about some other guys as well that I think are going to be on the Blue Jackets roster coming out of training camp next season. First, though, I've got to tell you all about FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here. FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you're going to get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. I love that FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking the Cavaliers to win it all, whether it's diving into player props, from three-pointers, steals, assists. FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props, and after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Once again, if you join FanDuel now, place your first $5 bet. If that bet wins, you're going to get $250 in bonus bets that you can spend on whatever you want. Just find the heaviest favorite you can, put $5 on it. If it wins, $250 to do whatever you want with. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim that $250 in bonus bets today. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Let's talk about... We're not going to spend too much time talking about Jet Greaves and Denton Mateychuk because I don't really consider them monsters necessarily. Mateychuk certainly not. Mateychuk is just down there because it's the playoffs and the Blue Jackets didn't make it, right? Like, I feel similarly about Jet Greaves. Like, you can't tell me that if the Blue Jackets had made the playoffs, they would not have got into it with Jet Greaves as the starter. And again, like, ifs and buts, blah, blah, blah. But I don't really count Mateychuk as a monster. Greaves, I do count as a monster just because that's where he played the majority of the season and was kind of up and down. Mateychuk is a Blue Jacket, but he's on the roster right now for the Monsters. He is not going to be a monster next season unless he has an absolutely catastrophic summer / rookie / prospect camp / training camp / preseason. He is going to be in the top 4 for the Blue Jackets next season. Similarly, Greaves, it feels like it's his job to lose, right? I don't know what they're going to do with Elvis. Is he a backup? Do they move him? Like, again, Don Waddell Don Waddell's doing that GM thing where he's like, we're going to explore all possibilities. We haven't looked at anything in specific yet, but we're going to explore all possibilities. And if the best possibility is that we roll the same goaltending that we did this season, then we'll do that. That's not a possibility. Like, I get that everyone kind of freaked out about it, but I simply cannot see a world, and maybe this will come back to bite me. I simply cannot see a world where this team rolls back Elvis and Tarasov as the goaltending next season. I simply can't do it. And maybe that's me expecting change in a team, but to Waddell's credit, the team is very different this year than it was last year, right? And I think it's going to look quite different again next year. Probably not as different. I think there's going to be less roster upheaval. I don't, off the top of my head, know what the roster for the Blue Jackets looked like in the last game of the 2023-2024 season. Let's see if I can look that up real quick while we talk. The point here is I'm expecting difference. I'm not expecting a ton of difference, but you've got to think that Greaves and Mateychuk are permanent losses to the Cleveland Monsters, which does kind of suck for the Cleveland Monsters, right? Like, it's not great. You lose your number one goalie, you lose your number one defenseman. A player we're going to talk about in a minute, your number one center is also potentially going to be gone. But the Blue Jackets, that's what the AHL is for, right? It's not to build players to have permanent careers down there. It is to act as a stepping stone. It is a developmental league. I think it does really good things with, combining developing players and also veterans. There are some things I would change, but like the goal of the AHL is for your players to eventually make it to the NHL, right? Like that's the stated goal. It is a developmental league. It is not a separate league. And I would say 95% of the AHL understands this. And I think the Monsters understand this better than most teams. I think a lot of you see a lot of monsters on the Blue Jackets roster, right? And playing big roles as well. Like Chinikov, monster. Marchenko, monster. Kent Johnson, briefly, monster. Voronkov, very briefly, monster. Cole Sillinger spent time down there. Zach Werenski spent a little bit of time down there. Mateychuk, time down there. Like Jake Christensen, monster. Greaves, monster. Like the probably 50% of the roster has spent time on the Cleveland Monsters roster, right? And the guys that didn't, guys like Monahan, guys like Olivier, guys like Gabranson, Severson, Zach Aston Reese, they didn't grow up in the organization, right? I think the only homegrown player that the Blue Jackets have right now that did not spend time in the AHL is Adam Fantilli, which 3rd overall pick, that makes sense, right? But I think every other player has spent time in the AHL. So that's where you get your players from. The goal is for Greaves and Mateychuk to not be monsters forever. I'm sure Monsters fans hate it, but that's kind of the nature of the beast, right? And it sucks for Monsters fans, but they should be. I don't know. As someone who spent a bunch of time over the past handful of, past 2, 3, 4 years, paying attention in more detail to the AHL. I covered the Ontario Reign for a little while. I covered the San Jose Barracuda for a little while. Obviously, I keep tabs on the Monsters. When players that I like and players that do well get called up, I do feel like a proud parent, right? So maybe that's because I, have fondness for the NHL team as well. And so it's not like you're losing them forever, but you want your players to do well and get called up, right? Like that's the goal of the AHL. So Greaves, Blue Jacket, great success story. Mateychuk was never going to be a monster full time. Someone else that I want to talk about that is maybe a little bit more under the radar. Actually, I found the roster that I was looking for. Here is the opening night roster for the Blue Jackets last season. And by last season, I mean the 23-24 season. Jake Bean, gone. Emil Bemstrom, gone. Justin Danforth, pending UFA. Adam Fantilli, still here. Johnny Gaudreau, obviously no longer with us. Erica Branson, still here. Boone Jenner, still here. Sean Corrali, pending UFA. Patrick Laine, gone. Kromachenko, still here. Andrew Peak, gone. Ivan Provorov, pending UFA. Eric Robinson, gone. Jack Rostovic, gone. Damon Severson, still here. Cole Sillinger, still here. Texier, gone. Werenski, still here. Elvis, question mark. That's your 19, and I assume that Daniil Tarasov was backing up. He's not listed on here because he didn't play. But of the 19 players listed there, 8 of them are still with the organization. If you flip to the 2025 season or the 24-25 season and you look at the opening night roster there, looking at, and again, like the opening night roster is not necessarily the be all and end all, but Zach Aston Reese under contract. You got Chinikov under contract. Christensen under contract. Fantilli under contract. Gabranson under contract. Jack Johnson probably gone. Kent Johnson under contract. Sean Corrali pending UFA. Kevin LeBanc as good as gone. Marchenko, yes. Monahan, yes. Olivier, yes. Provorov pending UFA. Pyyhtia, question mark. Damon Severson still here. Cole Sillinger still here. James Van Riemsdyk pending UFA. Zach Werenski still here. Elvis question mark. We'll count him. So that's of those 19 players, 13 of them finished the season and are, not and are actively under contract, right? So even if you look at the guys that could potentially be back, so I'm really only looking at Van Riemsdyk and potentially Provorov and Mikael Pyyhtia. That's 16 of 19. And a ton of those guys were not on the roster last year, at all. So, or the year before last. This time of year always messes me up because I can never decide what counts as last season. But the point I'm making here is that 13 players I said under contract. That's likely 6 players on the opening roster that will not be back. So there's potentially 6 brand new players, and like obviously there's wiggle room there. Like Denton Mateychuk wasn't on the opening night roster, Greaves wasn't on the opening night roster. On and off. Players like that. Dante Fabro, who I expect to be back, not on the opening night roster. Obviously, a waivers pickup later in the season. There are players that, again, Boone Jenner, not on that list because he was injured. So there's wiggle room there, but potentially you're looking at 4 to 5 new names on the roster if we include, again, Greaves and Mateychuk as 2 of those new names. We'll take another quick break, and then there's a couple of not necessarily under the radar candidates. They are guys that kind of got their feet wet in the NHL this year, and I expect them to make a big push. And guys that there's holes in the lineup for them to step into as well, right? So we're going to talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I've got to tell you about Game Time. Stanley Cup playoffs are here. If you've never been to a live NHL playoff game, it is unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy, it is next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Game Time is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with those last-minute deals, you can save up to 60%. And it's not just sports. You can get concerts, comedy, theater. If you need a ticket to get in the door, Game Time will give you the option and the best option of all of the ticketing app prices, of the ticketing software out there, if you ask me. They even have a low price guarantee, which means that if you find tickets in your section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And there's no surprise fees at checkout either, which is great. They've got all-in pricing, shows you the total cost up front. I love it. They've got the most flexible customer service policy in the industry as well. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Let's finish off with talking about a couple of guys that, like I said, got their feet wet in the NHL this year, and for my money anyway, are probably better options in the bottom 6 than, throwing $1 million at insert replacement level player here. Like, again, the Blue Jackets roster was really wonky this year, kind of by necessity. Obviously, they had a hole in the roster that they were not expecting in losing Johnny Gaudreau, obviously. And they kind of, again, they didn't manage, instead of trying to replace a player of that caliber, they kind of had to do it in the aggregate, not to quote Moneyball. And I don't know that they fully succeeded in getting the equivalent of Johnny Gaudreau from, Zach Aston-Reese, Kevin Labanc, and James Van Riemsdyk. But they did, I thought Zach Aston-Reese was a perfectly acceptable bottom 6 player. James Van Riemsdyk was a very good veteran that had a shockingly good offensive season and was good in the room as well. Again, you keep James Van Riemsdyk around for vibes and also to be emotional support for Ken Johnson. So I think those two really bonded, which is very funny because Johnson is very kind of standoffish, feels mean, but he is very kind of serious. And I don't think he likes talking to the media a lot and is not super chatty. Whereas James Van Riemsdyk is just kind of sunshine. So I enjoy that those two seem to have bonded. But, you did not get Johnny Gaudreau level replacement from those players. And also you had 3 players to kind of try and fill the role of one. So the roster is really wonky. There was not a lot of holes in the roster for young players, especially on defense, which, again, the defense is really kind of crowded. And there's not really anyone that's ready to step up yet. Nikolai Makarov is a big question mark, but I think you pencil him in as a monster next season, unless he blows you away at training camp. We've seen it before, Vladislav Gavrikov, for example, showed up at training camp one year and then was like, well, I'm a Blue Jacket now. So, he's an option there. But I'm talking about Luca Del Bel Belluz, and I'm talking about Mikael Pyyhtia. Now, for me, I would have those two in my bottom six over guys like Kevin Labanc, over guys like Christian Fischer, over guys like Dylan Gambrell, any day. I would much rather take a young player trying to prove himself than a veteran who is just kind of, and this is again mean to those players, but not necessarily going through the motions, but like they've hit their ceiling, right? You're not going to get anything more out of Luke Cunnin than you've already gotten out of him. Whereas I think Luca Del Bel Belluz specifically, I think there's possibility there, right? Like there's 10 to 15 goals a year in Luca Del Bel Belluz, maybe more if he moves up the lineup. But right now, he feels like a better option than Sean Corelli as well. He has been excellent in the AHL. He was great when he was called up in lieu of the Monahan injury. Obviously, they lost Monahan, and then I think they lost Sillinger either just before or just after. So for a minute there, Luca Del Bel Belluz was like playing second line center on this team and doing a great job at it. So to me, again, unless he has a catastrophic training camp, I feel like that fourth line center spot is kind of, his name is penciled in there, right? I don't think anything's written in pen yet, but I think his name is penciled in there. Don Waddell speaks very highly of him. Dean Everson speaks extremely highly of him. And again, evidenced by the fact that they did a really fun thing with the Monsters this year, which is they called up the players and then played them in the same place, roughly, that they would play in the AHL. So instead of calling up your top line center in the AHL and having him play 8 minutes on fourth line wing like they did last year, which we won't get into that, he got called up and he got thrown in as a middle six center, typically a second line center, which is great, And I realize that all of this sounds a little bit kind of contradictory, but I think this team needs depth scoring in a big way. And I think you get that by improving your bottom six and making it younger, making it more dynamic. Like the game is not, you don't need a fourth line that just kind of hits people and doesn't really try to create any kind of offense. I feel like the league is moving past that. You want guys like Del Bel Belluz, who is an extremely good player, but again, potential to move up the lineup. And then I like for his wing as well, I like Mikael Pyyhtia. I thought he did extremely well. The time, the time that he was with the Blue Jackets, obviously he was up and down the lineup a little bit. He was in and out of the lineup a little bit. I don't think he expected to make the team. But I thought he did pretty well with the hand that he was given. My advice for Pyyhtia is shoot the puck more next year because he's got an excellent shot on him, but he wasn't shooting the puck at the NHL level. And I think that was what really hurt his chances at kind of sticking around a little bit longer. An under the radar candidate, or maybe not a super under the radar, James Malatesta, I like a lot. Obviously, he made his NHL debut last season, played about 10 or 11 games. Did a pretty good job. Again, another really good option for the bottom six, and specifically that fourth line, if you ask me. Was one of the last cuts in October. It was him and Owen Sillinger kind of battling it out for that extra spot, and then I think they claimed Zach-Aston Reese off waivers, I think, and he kind of took that spot. But there's options in the youth, is what I'm saying here. I will say Mikael Pyyhtia needs a new contract. He is an RFA at the minute. And I'll be interested to see who Don Waddell keeps around, because I think basically every monster that needed a new contract last season got cut. Apart from Jet Greaves got a new contract. I think Owen Sillinger contract was from Waddell. The Cole Clayton contract, I think, was also from Don Waddell. But monsters that need new contracts. Hunter McCown is an RFA. Mikael Pyyhtia. Samuel Knazko. Damon Hunt, who we got in the David Jiricek trade. Ole Julian Bjork-Holm is an RFA. And Cole Clayton is also an RFA. So we'll see how many of those guys get qualifying offers. My guess is probably half of them. I think Bjork-Holm is probably done. I don't think they're going to quit on Damon Hunt yet, considering he was, a piece that they got in the Jiricek trade, which we'll see how that continues to age. Hunter McCown is a good young player for the Monsters. Mikael Pyyhtia, I imagine, will get a new contract. Knazko is a kind of a question mark. I like him a lot, but he's kind of fallen down the depth chart. Cole Clayton's a good veteran. I say veteran, he's like 24, 25. I imagine they'll keep him around. UFAs, Joseph Lebate, I imagine, is gone. Dylan Gambrell, I think, is gone. Tragically, I think Trefik Swolansky is probably gone. He's going to go to like the Colorado Eagles and get 80 points for their AHL team. Is my guess. He's going to do the TJ Tynan thing, which makes me sad. Owen Stillinger, I suspect they'll keep around. And Zach Sorchenko, the backup goalie, is also a UFA, which to back up AHL goalie, you can kind of take him or leave him. So there's going to be lots of movement in the Monsters organization. Some of that movement is going to inform the Blue Jackets. Some of it will not. But to wrap up this whole episode, my guess is the Monsters are going to lose a lot of players. Forwards are going to go to the Blue Jackets. There's not really a hole in the defense right now, and there's not really anyone I like Stanislav Svozil a lot. I don't think he's going to be taking one of the spots in the Blue Jackets lineup. Unfortunately, I like Casco a lot. I don't think he's going to be taking a spot in the lineup. There's options. There's potential. There's always a chance of someone like Nikolai Makarov, who we didn't even really get to talk about much in this episode. I mentioned him at the end there, coming in and blowing them out of the water like Gavrikov did a couple of years ago. That was like 8 years ago now. Time is wild. But there's options there of him coming in from the KHL. There's rumblings that Sergei Ivanov, the goaltender, is going to make his way over, which, if he's the real deal that a lot of people think he might be, could be a very good replacement for Jet Greaves, since that's, Jet Greaves is going to be a Blue Jacket. There's movement, there's potential. There's only really a couple of guys that I think are likely to be Blue Jackets next year from this Monsters squad. I would love to see Trefik Swolansky get an extended look. I don't think he will. I think he's run out of time in this organization. And I don't think that, we've seen Don Waddell does not have the same sentimentality towards Kekalainen's draft picks that Jarmo Kekalainen does, which makes sense. But Trefik Swolansky is Mr. Monster to me. And it'll suck if he goes somewhere else. But that's hockey. That's the AHL. We'll see how it goes. I think that's all I've got. It was a really good question. I did plan to spend like 5 minutes on it and then spend 32 minutes on it. But that was a fun question. So shout out to, again, I'm really so very sorry that I don't remember who sent the email. But if it was you, if you want to take credit for it, be my guest. I won't know any difference, but thank you for sending that question in. Thank you for listening to this episode, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, on YouTube, and we'll be back tomorrow with another brand new episode looking at a little bit more detail at these holes in the Blue Jackets roster, because one hole that we didn't really address was that second line left wing next to Adam Fantilli and Ken Johnson. So we'll talk about that in tomorrow's episode. Thank you for listening to this episode. I've been Jacob Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.